Alright guys, welcome back to Milk and Cookies Total War. I am IndiePride and the Aztec Space Laser Dinosaurs have landed. This is Total War Warhammer 2 and my footage from E3 Judges Day. So we're going to go through a bunch of highlight clips and gameplay while I talk about my impressions and show off unit cards and go a bit more in depth with stat breakdowns and how each of these units will play on the battlefield. We'll get a great look at most of the High Elf and Lizardmen models and see some of those impressive monster animations throughout the video. But it is important to remember, this game is still 3.5 months from launch. September 28th is release day, so you'll definitely notice some texture issues and other things that I would expect Creative Assembly to iron out before the game goes live. For those of you who want pure gameplay and no talking whatsoever, I uploaded a full playthrough of the quest battle with no commentary at the same time, so you can go over and watch that at your leisure as we see Grimlock toss a High Elf up into the air like a ragdoll and snack on him for dinner. It's a completely different playthrough in that other video, so there should be no footage overlap whatsoever. You'll get a more immersive and auditory experience over there. This is more of a breakdown video, but there's going to be tons of gameplay in this one as well. So just to give those of you who haven't been keeping up with Warhammer news an introduction and explanation of what the hell you're seeing here, this is Total War Warhammer 2, the second game in a planned trilogy where the High Elves, Dark Elves, Lizardmen, and Skaven will be the four main playable races. This particular battle is the Battle at the Fallen Gates, a quest battle where Kroq-Gar and his Carnosaur Grimlock lead a Lizardmen army to defend an ancient ritual site from the High Elves. The Fallen Gates are a cosmic device of the Old Ones located in Lustria, a stellar bridge that once reached across the stars, but even the Slann Mage Priests do not pretend to know its inner workings, so for the High Elves to meddle is a great trespass. There's no time for communication, no time for diplomacy. Gotta get in there, kick some High Elf ass, and give them swift punishment to prevent the coming disaster. One thing I think you guys will notice right off the bat are the animations and the sense of weight, which I think are a step up in quality from Total War Warhammer 1. I think the first game handled impact damage and visual feedback from charges beautifully. I mean, it's obviously completely over the top, but incredibly satisfying to see units take a charge of Blood Knights, or something like that to the face, and that's been ramped up here for sure. The Carnosaur and Stegodon and Bastiladon charges are so much fun to watch, and the movement and combat of the Lizardmen is differentiated very nicely from the other playable factions. Very predatory, very savage and animalistic, as you can see from these Temple Guard who are wading into melee with the Swordmasters of Hoeth. From what I've seen, the Elves seem to have many of the same animations as human soldiers, which is a bit disappointing because they're pretty arrogant and flashy when it comes to close quarters combat and the lore. But like every other race we've had thus far, I do expect them to get a few unique animations in there by the time the game goes live. The spell effects like Fiery Convocation from the lore of High Magic are absolutely gorgeous and look very impactful, although it's really hard to judge because the AI Elf mages obviously aren't going to use magic to its fullest potential and properly line up wind spells because it's the AI. I can imagine that doing a massive amount of damage if positioned on the flank of a battle line though, and ripping through formations from the side. Without a doubt in my mind, the highlight of this quest battle is when the Sun Dragon appears and heads straight for Kroq-Gar and Grimlock. There are some amazing moments between them, from the fiery breath attack the dragon can unleash from above, to a specific attack where the dragon lifts up the Carnosaur into the air before slamming him back to Earth. There's even one where Grimlock tackles the dragon to the ground and bites deep into its neck, preventing it from escaping and striking that killing blow. This is the kind of combat that is a dream many of us have had since we were children, and to see gigantic dinosaurs or fantasy creatures do battle in this manner and just brought to life here in a way that very few games deliver, it's just something that I think is really special. This is why people like us play Total War. There's nothing quite like this kind of combat and visual experience. It's pretty amazing. I will say though, there are definitely some glaring texture issues and problems in the quest battle, and pretty severe clipping in there as well. As you saw when the Sun Dragon lifts up Grimlock on the slanted slope there, you definitely get some pretty severe clipping that hopefully you can get ironed out a bit before release. In terms of battle pacing, I know Creative Assembly has expressed interest in slowing combat down for Game 2, but I personally didn't get that feeling in the quest battle I played. It seemed to be very similar pace of combat and stamina regeneration and movement speed as Game 1, but those are just numerical values, right? That can be tweaked very easily, so it wouldn't surprise me if the final game feels very different than what it did in my time with it. The army abilities, like summoning cold ones, are pretty cool and fit well with the faction themes. I didn't get to see Vol's Hammer, but that's a pretty good example of one for the High Elves, which will blow up a wall in a siege battle in a single strike. And the ability to summon cold ones for the Lizardmen, I did get to see, where your lord essentially uses an old ones device to deep strike a pack of raptors wherever he wants on the battlefield. Sincerely hope it does not work like that in multiplayer, by the way. I think that would make skirmish builds pretty much entirely useless, but definitely very fun for single player and campaign. And God, those Grimlock animations are so impressive. It really is amazing. The High Elves and the textures and terrain in general look gorgeous, besides the few texture issues that I already mentioned. The High Elves look really, really good across the board. I still think the White Lions could afford to be a bit more over the top and have more lion and fur on them, and the textures of the High Elf Spearman shield still look a little bit flat to me, but all in all, they look great. And for those of you who are worried about the color scheme, this is the color scheme in Heraldry of Attain, but it's a High Elf sub-faction in a quest battle, which always have different colors in the main faction, so Tyrion's faction and their shields will likely look pretty different. Prince Amandil and the Swordmasters of Hoeth are the best looking units for the Azure though, and I think they were nailed out of the park. So with all that out of the way, let's get into the unit cards and unit stats and do a breakdown on those, and we can kind of talk about and look at all this information and try to extrapolate how these units will actually perform on the battlefield and compare it to some of the units that are already in Total War Warhammer 1. As we expected, Krotgar and Grimlock together are terrifying, literally. Remember, Carnosaurs are a huge reason why dragons no longer live in Lustria in the lore, and that is certainly reflected here with a huge bonus versus large and high armor piercing values. They are going to be one of the best melee lords in this trilogy, hands down. Decent leadership, good armor value, high melee attack, and a charge bonus that's pretty massive, make him a threat in the middle of infantry blobs and to enemy lords, especially when they're mounted up. He's also fast with a really high mass, as we saw, can easily pull through infantry formations and hunt down high value targets, and he can summon cold ones anywhere on the battlefield with his army ability, and heal units with the cold-blooded ability, which severely lowers melee defense and I believe armor as well, but will regenerate health of any unit you plop it on. So if you're popping that heal on a unit, you want to make sure they're out of combat, and you can do that up to 3 times, so that's pretty powerful. If you pull a unit out of combat, make sure they get some heal in, and then send them back in. Sora Spears and Mace variants have the Primal Instincts trait, which means they can go berserk in combat if their leadership or HP drop enough. This is a step down from the Feral units, though, who straight up have Rampage, and will chase after units while players lose complete control of them. When they Rampage, you cannot maneuver them at all. You have to wait until their berserk state goes away before you can control them again. The units who have Rampage morph into that state very quickly, often as soon as they enter melee, so if you want better leadership, better stats, and more control over your monsters, skip the Feral version and mount them up with Skinks or Scarvets and Old Bloods instead. The Feral versions will be cheaper though, so there's a trade-off there. You can either go for cheaper stuff that's more likely to perform poorly for you, or go for the more expensive stuff that will be a bit more reliable. The Bastiladon has armor piercing and bonus versus infantry, as does the Stegodon, and they both cause terror, but you'll notice the Stegodon is a step above in pretty much every single category except for armor. It's 120 armor on the Stegodon with 140 on the Bastiladon. So as we expected, that Bastiladon will be amongst the highest armor units in the entire trilogy. 140 armor is insane. It makes it insanely tanky, but the Stegodon still has 120 armor, which is already a very high value, a way bigger charge bonus, and much higher weapon strength as well. So it seems like CA is going for a tier system here rather than giving them different roles. The Bastiladon with the solar engine fires a beam of Chotek in a very similar manner to the Luminarch of Hysh for the Empire, but fires faster and has a shorter range. It deals both fire and magical damage, and leaves a debuff on the enemy unit called Seared, which lowers their armor by 20. 403 missile damage is painful when it's simultaneously lowering your armor and hitting you at a pretty steady clip because it fires pretty fast. But I can see this unit really shining when it's on the flank and firing through a block of infantry from the side. It can snipe single entities, but I think it's going to be better when you're shooting from the flank into a big infantry formation. It's essentially a tank, and alongside the steam tank for the Empire, is one of the few pieces of artillery that can easily protect itself from most enemy threats. Way more survivable than even something like a Cygor for the Beastmen. As we expected, skink skirmishers with blowpipes do have poison, but they can also fire while moving, which is a pretty cool addition. Very short range of 80, which essentially is half of your typical archer unit, but they have 30 ammunition, so about 6 more volleys than a typical archer unit as well. If kept alive, with 30 ammunition, they will be able to dish out some pretty serious DPS, as well as that very nice poison debuff. Temple Guard, for some reason, have less weapon strength than regular Saurus warriors with Maqueedles, which I guess is because of their bonus versus large and high armor piercing. And they have charge defense against large and one-handed halberds, and they do have shields, so in theory with their high AP, they should be able to perform well against armored infantry, cavalry, and monsters, so kind of a jack-of-all-trades infantry unit. But again, as I discussed in my recent videos, if halberd base attack time isn't changed from game 1, they may end up underperforming because halberds typically attack so slowly, which could be an issue for them. I hope that isn't the case, because I really want Temple Guard to feel strong and very much worth using, especially when you're rocking them in tandem with a Slan Mage Priest or, hell, Mazda Mundi especially. I really want the Temple Guard to be able to form a very nice bodyguard regiment around him. A big surprise for me were the Cold One Spear Riders. They have a pretty beefy stat line, which I wasn't really expecting. Armor piercing and bonus versus large together is the holy grail for cav units, because you really want them to perform well in and ideally win cavalry engagements. And to top it all off, they have 85 armor. Melee attack and defense are kind of low, so their chance to hit and be hit might end up being a problem, but depending on pricing, they could end up being a really good choice, which I wasn't really expecting. I thought they might kind of be a crap unit. So with all that said, let's now take a look at the High Elves units. Biggest thing you guys should pay attention to is the Martial Prowess passive, which is essentially a unit buff that gives pretty much the entire High Elf roster plus 12 melee defense and plus 50% charge resistance when HP is higher than 50%. As soon as a unit's health drops below half, they lose that buff, and this is to represent the fact that the High Elves love it when war is beautiful and clean and their formations are intact and they're slaughtering anyone that gets close, but that invincible veneer begins to break down a bit once they start taking serious casualties, which, to be fair, is probably true for the vast majority of Warhammer races and indeed martial cultures in history as well, but whatever, it's a mechanic unique to the High Elves in this game. I'm fine with it. It's pretty powerful. Every unit that doesn't already have charge defense against all or large takes essentially half damage from charges. That's a pretty big deal in and of itself, especially in cav fights when you're going up against high charge bonus factions like the Lizardmen or Chaos especially. In terms of units, the Sun Dragon is the youngest form and lowest level of High Elf Dragon. Causes terror, obviously. It's a fire-breathing dragon and has a breath attack that can do quite a decent amount of damage to single entities and full units. You'll notice it does have pretty low armor value of 50, which is why Grimlock just rips him apart in that quest battle once he decides to land, but he does have that scaly skin missile resistance to partially make up for that. So he will be relatively resistant to archer or handgun fire. High Elf archers have 170 range, same as Glade Guard for the Wood Elves, which is 10 more than Empire Crossbowmen or the equivalent for most non-Azrai factions, which means they will get the first volley off in the skirmish fight, which should help you out because getting that first volley in any skirmish fight in Total War is a really big deal because you can deplete their numbers, and when they fire back, they're doing less damage from you, and it just kind of snowballs from there. For infantry, the White Lions of Trace have high armor piercing and good armor, with a significant missile block chance, but a surprisingly low charge bonus. To be fair, it's on par with Chaos Warriors with great weapons and Wildwood Rangers and other two-handed AP charge bonus values, but it is interesting that CA seems to have shifted away from axe units, just melting enemies off the charge like in some of the previous Total Wars like Attila. They don't seem to have the trait implemented yet, but White Lions will have a bonus to speed and combat in the woods. Silverhelms are the entry-level shot cavalry of the High Elves, and they look really solid. Nothing spectacular there, but they look pretty cost-effective to me. Obviously, we don't know the pricing yet, so they might not be, but I expect them to be a pretty good choice. And the Illyrian Reaver Light Cav will be the only Vanguard unit for the Azure. Extremely fast, 85 speed, which is the same value as Wild Riders for the Wood Elves. Swordmasters of Hoeth are the cream of the crop for high elf infantry, performing like great swords for the Empire with armor piercing and a bonus versus infantry, but with 6 higher melee attack, 6 higher weapon strength, 12 more leadership, and 12 more melee defense, but 10 less armor. I do expect Swordmasters to beat great swords pretty handily in melee, but they do not currently have their missile resistance, because currently, like every other melee unit for the Elves, they like all have a tower shield block chance, which gives them very high missile block, or a ward save, or some kind of trait that grants them physical resistance. And CA have decided at this point to avoid giving it to the Swordmasters as well, so they don't have to mess with their very good stat line, which I'm fine with. I want them to be a blender in melee, and if they happen to be a little bit more susceptible to missile fire as a trade-off, so be it. It is interesting though, because in the lore, Swordmasters of Hoeth are able to deflect arrow fire with their swords very easily. They can strike through a candle without even disturbing the flame. They can do all kinds of crazy stuff. But in terms of raw gameplay, I would rather the Swordmasters be very good in melee and not have the missile resistance than be a little bit worse and have it, because it's not really that big a deal. I would never have expected them to be particularly good against missile fire, and in the tabletop, the ward save they have against missile fire is still not particularly useful for them. But remember, all these stats are still subject to change. CA is just now entering into the heavy balancing and polishing stage of development, but I think that those unit cards in general give us some pretty good insight on how each roster is looking in terms of combat effectiveness. Pricing, of course, will be the other major factor that we don't know much about yet, but does anything in particular stick out to you guys in terms of these unit stats? If you all have any comments or questions about the event and my playtime with the game, or any concerns about the unit cards, please let me know and I'll do my best to answer them in the comment section below. I'm going to leave you all with a bunch more gameplay and some B-roll footage for you to peruse at your leisure. Again, thanks to Creative Assembly for having me out to LA. It was a really good time, and I think Total War Warhammer 2 is overall shaping up very nicely. Was excited to be able to bring you guys this gameplay, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Indie Pride signing out for now.
fallen gate and are vulnerable to attack.
Solus, Lord, Texusrokta, Tadeta. Solus, Ula.